So this is the Jared Presley Experience, and with me is Ben Wan, one of the co-hosts of Superhero Stuff You Should Know, which actually is one that I do have a Patreon to. If you want to explain more, how did you get into doing this podcast?
Well, it was started by my co-host Andrew. He started what was basically Superhouse podcasts. I want to say back in 2015, 2016 or so. So
Yeah.
we had previously met. We were coworkers, and we both bonded over a love of superheroes, and he knew that I was a big Batman guy, and he was like, "Hey, like, would you want to come on for a few episodes to talk about Batman?" I was like, "Sure." And he called me the senior Batman correspondent for that. There was no junior Batman correspondent, so it was an interesting title. But I came on every now and then, talked about Suicide Squad, talked about The Killing Joke, talked about all sorts of stuff. And then there were a few outings that we did too. There's a few videos of us in the early days of us going to like WonderCon or going to the Adam West museum for Batman 66. But it was something where it was like something I dabbled in, and I enjoyed being on there. But I was for where I was at my life, I just didn't think that it was in the cards for me to do something like that on a weekly basis, because it was like, okay, what could I possibly talk about on a weekly basis on this? Especially, it's like sometimes a lot of the times it was about news or about reviews of movies, and if it was a slow news week, I got nothing. I got nothing to talk about for that.
And what a lot of people may not realize with podcasts, especially what you do, it doesn't generate enough money to support. It can't be your sole income. Very few podcasters can really do that. I mean, obviously, a lot of people know Joe Rogan, but I mean, that's like very few people.
Yeah, but you got to be like the Joe Rogans and the Kevin Smiths. Those are like celebrities. Those are people with big followings already. And it's just like, if you don't have that establishment and you're just talking about, reviews, or you're like the millionth person to talk about the latest Thor movie or something, like, you're not really going to build up that much of an audience, because people don't really know who they are. Why would I want to listen to these random guys I don't know versus Kevin Smith's review with Mark Bernardin?
I'm glad you mentioned that, because I mean, one of the reasons that attracted me to the podcast is this topics about Batman and Superman that you usually didn't get. I mean, there's so many like movie reviews of Batman, Superman, and different things. But as far as the deep dives, I mean, that's really what I'm interested in, because I mean, there's so many just general movie reviews that in an ocean of like on YouTube or Spotify, it's going to get lost. Was there any general direction from since 2015 to then when you're doing more of those deep dives? Was there any influences? I mean, I know Dan's a big help on that, but how did that start with him?
Well, I'll sort of catch up and say that we really weren't Superhero Stuff You Should Know, or the format of Superhero Stuff You Should Know, until 2019, where it was kind of a lull in the podcast. Andrew was doing some solo episodes. He was trying to figure out like what the new direction would be. If you listen to like the backlog and stuff, there's a ton of other co-hosts who aren't me at that time, and they just were not as committed as Andrew was. Andrew was basically Superhouse at that time, and when he brought me on, it was in 2019. It was like, hey, it's the 30th anniversary of the Batman '89 film, and what would be really cool for your show is if I just go over some of the like scripts leading up to the movie, because I was already rereading them anyway for the 30th anniversary. So that's what started kind of what's the sort of the pilot, in a way, without us realizing it, for Superhero Stuff You Should Know. Of I came to his house, we watched Batman '89, we did sort of just a 1 hour review episode, which is fine, but the real pilot really is that episode, the Batman script from 1982, where I go into the Tom Mankiewicz script, I go into the original Sam Hamm stuff. We talk for like 2 hours there in Andrew's living room about this stuff, and who knew it was going to blow up? It's still our most viewed video on YouTube for that. So it was one where I enjoyed doing that. And I'm like, there's unmade stuff for Batman Returns. There's unmade stuff for Batman Forever. And then suddenly I just keep showing up. And then if you hear the backlog at one point, I'm just like, you should just make me co-host. And then he just made me co-host on the air for that. And that's kind of how it launched. And we just kind of evolved it over time. And then when it comes to what you're mentioning, for those who are listening who might not be familiar with my show, we currently are sort of have a video format where you see us, but you're also mainly seeing visuals that go with what we're talking about.
Oh yeah, that's much newer too, because when I first started listening, that wasn't there, which is a nice addition.
Yeah, that came about sometime, as actually it's kind of hard to believe that it was this recent, but like it was basically like less than a year ago, I want to say, or it was last summer really.
Yeah.
Where what had happened was one of our former co-hosts, Wolfie or Stefan, he goes by both names, had discovered StreamYard. And he was like, hey, I can pull up all these visuals while we're talking. And when I guested on his podcast, I saw what he was doing with that. I'm like, you know what? That would be really cool, especially because when it's just us having a conversation and I'm going so deep into certain script stuff, I could see how it's easy for the listener to potentially get a little lost in some of the details. But there's something really cool about, like, especially if it's something that's unmade, to just show you something that goes with what I'm talking about, even though like it's not necessarily, sometimes it's concept art, sometimes it's not concept art, sometimes it's a comic panel or something similar to what I'm talking about. But we experimented with that for a little bit, but I think it was really, I think, the Steve Englehart Batman treatment episode where I really
remember that. Yes.
Yeah, that was really the first time that I was like, hey, it's an unmade script. Here are visuals kind of to go with it so that you don't get as lost in the details and you can go to YouTube to watch it. And if not, then we try our best to especially with an unmade script, that we can still do it in a podcast format where the listeners can listen in and still follow it. They just might not have the visuals, but it's not completely bent around that. So that came about.
And I was going to say, because the most of the time when I catch up is when I'm driving to and from work. So I can tell you that, yes, I mean, you do a pretty good job of describing it. Just occasionally I'll jump on YouTube and just briefly like go through and scan quickly, or skim through. But most of the time when I'm listening to the podcast, just convenience wise, to and from just commuting. Sure.
And I would be the same, I would do the same. So it's just like, we kind of have to acclimate to both, considering that, numbers wise, our bigger audience is YouTube, but we also want to honor the fact that this is a podcast, and we have podcast listeners who are doing the same thing that you're doing, where you're listening in while you're driving. So we wanted to make sure that was still, viable. And then I think it was like maybe a month in where I was just like, guys, it's a ton of work to just put together the visuals after I've already read the script, written the notes out, prepared the episode. And so it was kind of a factor of like, I basically need an assistant. I need somebody to help put this type of stuff together for me, because I don't necessarily have to be the one to literally take this one image, drag it into, Google Slides for it. I can just tell whoever to put it all together. And so I put some feelers out, and Dan was just hands down the easiest choice. Just it was very quick, because like he knew the type of material that we covered. He would already be listening. He wasn't already a fan, but he's just like, I love this stuff. I would be interested in this. I would be listening to this anyway.
So you knew him through the podcast? How did you meet Dan?
Oh, I didn't know him through the podcast. We put out feelers. What I mean by put out feelers is we put out feelers for like an assistant position.
Oh, okay.
And stuff. And so out of the applicants, there were many applicants, but his message to me showed that he really could know the material. He could really handle this. And then we kind of did the trial run with it was basically the unmade Hulk script of Jonathan Hensley from the 90s, even though it's a funny one to bring him on to, because we don't usually cover the Hulk stuff, but we were trying to fulfill a fan request. And I was just like, hey, like, could you do this? And he just went above and beyond. If he couldn't find an image, he like photoshopped it for us. And I'm just like, okay, we got the right guy for this. And so he's been with us ever since, for the past year or so.
And in my opinion, he's definitely no joke. He really knows this material, and he puts a ton of time just for how deep some of that info is. Like a lot of that stuff I never heard of. Even a lot of people who know a lot about it never heard of.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of it comes about with me remembering something I might have read, or me reading through some stuff. Some stuff comes up last minute, some stuff I'm reading up on just to see. I'm not always trustworthy of IMDb or wikis, but if they have something, I double check it. I double check and be like, okay, wait, is this actually true? And sometimes it's not, and then it's worth bringing up that it's not true, and then other times it is, and then it's worth bringing that up too. So there are things in there that I think I'm pretty much trying to make the show what I would be interested in the most. So that's where a lot of the info comes from. Where I'm just like, if I'm this big of a fan, especially of the Burton Batman type stuff, which a lot of our audience are, I would want to know this, and this, and that's what we put in.
That's interesting, and I don't know. You might know more as far as the demographic, because I'm in between Andrew and yours' age. I'm in between there, and so I don't know with the Burton films if that's just a generational thing. I don't know demographic wise how much older people or younger people you have, or if the majority of it would be within the 80s, 90s period of time.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, I'm not looking at the specific demographic right now, but I would say that we are pretty much in the same age range as our audience on that. So I think a big reason why we ended up blowing up with the Burton stuff is simply because I've had history with BatmanOnline.com, which it's a big,
I remember that. Yes.
Yeah.
It's been around for ages.
It's been around for ages, and it's basically very big on the 90s Batman. And so when they started sharing us out, they're like, that's the prime audience. And so of course they would come in want to check out the ones about 90s Batman. Maybe not necessarily the Nolan Batman or the Snyder Batman, but definitely the Burton Batman. And so when I saw that, I was like, all right, well then give the people what they want right now, because we're still growing or whatever. But like, who am I to disagree with these numbers on all this stuff? And it was funny because I was just like, it's a shame because I feel like I've covered everything I could about Batman 89 of that one.
There's always more. No, there's always more.
And then suddenly I'm like, I could do this or this, and now we're like still covering it in some ways. So it's certain episode ideas I had to open up my mind and be like, I was like, nah, we covered that movie before. I'm like, did you? You only really covered that script. You didn't really cover this aspect or that aspect, or just like, what if it's a character focused thing of just like, the unmade return of Jack Nicholson's Joker came about, just because I'm just like, oh yeah, there were a lot of times specifically where they tried to resurrect him. We could do a whole episode just on that. So those sorts of things have been kind of what contribute to the evolution.
But I'm just curious, when was your personal first experience, if you can remember, with Batman? Like, how were you introduced to that, if you remember?
Yeah, probably with 89. Probably with the 89 movie. I don't remember the exact details of what got me in front of the TV with a VHS tape or any of that. But I remember specifically my main exposure to Batman was watching the 89 movie and then listening to a tape of the adaptation of Len Wein and John Byrne and Jim Apato's the Untold Legend of the Batman. Unfortunately, it was only the first. It was only the first.
It's not complete.
Issue. It wasn't complete, but I was just thought like, oh, this is just it's an origin story of Batman. And I realized in listening to it, even as a kid, I'm just like, oh, like the legend changes. Somehow I already inherently knew it, because in 89, Jack Napier, the Joker, kills Batman's parents, and then the Untold Legend of the Batman, it's the old school comic where Lou Moxon hired Joe Chill to do it and stuff. So I don't know how I reconciled that when I was like 5. Somehow I did, or I just thought that Joe Chill was just the other dude who helped Jack Napier kill them in the movie, something like that. But
technically,
that was my main thing.
And I didn't realize this until a few years ago. Technically, in the 89 movie, that other guy, because I always thought as a kid, I was like, was that Bob? That's kind of a rumor thing. But officially, it's credited as, I believe, Joe Chill.
Michael Uslan said like that the additional guy in there is to account for people saying that it could be Joe Chill. He's mainly credited as Other Mugger on that, so it's still somewhat ambiguous. I forgot where, because I think we did talk about it at one point. I kind of go either way. I don't like, in terms of, I think it's for the story of the movie, it makes sense for it to be Bob, because like there's no Joe Chill established, so it just makes sense that it's young Bob. But
and he repeats that line too.
Yeah, let's go, Jack. Yeah. But it's just like, well, let's go, Jack could have been said by any former partner of Jack. So if you're somebody trying to inject more comic canon into the Tim Burton universe, then that could be Joe Chill. So I'm pretty much of two minds about it. I think it fits the story and the universe more if it's Bob, just because it's it's just easier or more organic to tie it into a pre-established character.
See, and for me, technically, Batman Returns is the first Batman movie I saw all the way through, but I did see clips of Batman. Specifically, what I remember, I believe it's probably like 1991 or something around then, before Returns is out, was a rooftop scene before bedtime, and we couldn't see the whole movie, so my parents just had that on. That's pretty much what I remember. That Returns and, well, Batman the Animated Series, really nostalgia-wise, is what really got me into Batman before any of the comics, really. And with Batman and Batman Returns, it's so different. Do you have a personal favorite? Because that's just something that's I'm curious with, because within that community, there's so many people who, it depends on your taste, because in a lot of ways they are very different.
They are, and I think it depends. This might be a basic answer, but it depends on the mood. So,
I understand. Yes.
89 is very much what got me into Batman. It's a lot more traditional, even though, obviously there's changes from canon. But it's just, there's a magic to it for sort of from a general Batman universe perspective. And then Batman Returns, I feel like there's a more emotional core to it than 89. I don't feel like 89 has the feeling of nostalgia for me, but I don't feel like there's much of an emotional core to the story when I watch it. Now, that could also be because when I watch it now, it's like viewing number 3000. So like, it's kind of hard to have any emotional reaction to something where I know every single beat. But with Returns, it's a little different. Returns is funny for me because of the fact that I had the VHS tape for Batman 89. I was always told Returns was too dark. And then I went to see Batman Forever in the theater, got the VHS tape for Batman Forever. So I mainly grew up with Batman 89 and Batman Forever in like the first decade of my life or so. I didn't really watch much of Batman Returns until I think I wanted to be a little bit more of a completist once I started hitting puberty. And I don't really know the correlation there, but it's funny time because I consider Batman Returns to be the Batman movie of my adolescence, even though technically it was out way before I even hit that period. But that's when I started rewatching on VHS, and it's the feelings from Penguin, of the Tim Burton type aspects of being an outsider, the sort of loneliness Bruce feels at the end. Those were things that I just didn't get from the 89 movie or really Batman Forever, and that's that's the kind of stuff that you can relate to as an adolescent kid, especially if you're an adolescent kid who really loves Batman and stuff. You're probably not somebody who's super popular in high school at that time. So,
for sure. Yeah. especially back then. Yeah.
So that's for me, like if the emotional core of Batman Returns is still, there's a lot more to it. To me, there's a lot more personal connection to that one in some way, but I'm also, as a Batman fan, sometimes leaning towards 89. So it's pretty equal to me. I think that maybe there's a slight edge to Returns.
And I'm similar in a way because that's technically the first one I saw in the theater.
Sure.
And most of the toys and action figures I had when growing up was from, I was too young at the time to get them from 89, but in 92 I had a lot of the action figures. I agree. I mean, especially around Christmas time, it's definitely Returns. And there's aspects to both. Some that I like more and some that I don't. I mean, neither one of them are perfect.
Right.
But that is a hard one. I feel like, especially if someone's a big Burton fan, I feel like they're going to go more to Returns. It is a bit more weird. It's not necessarily bad. It's really odd.
Right. Yeah. The differences were summed up by Daniel Waters, and when I went to a live event for the 30th anniversary of Batman Returns, and he's basically summed it up best. Whereas, like, if Batman 89 is a Batman movie that happened to be directed by Tim Burton, that Batman Returns is a Tim Burton movie that happens to have Batman, and that was the intention when they were making Returns, and they definitely succeeded on that because you feel like, okay, this, I can see how this fits with 89, but you could also kind of feel like it fits as its own thing in a way.
Cool. And if anyone is interested, you just did a podcast on that event, I believe.
Yeah, I did. And that was an incredible event, and also it also made me lean a little bit more towards Returns, just because you're there in a crowd, everybody's there for this specific Burton movie, and there's so many people involved with this specific one that it's kind of hard not to get swept up into into that. So I'm just like, yeah, like there's a reference to that,
and a lot of them would have been in that area because Batman Returns was filmed in, like, I believe, Burbank, on the set, and while Batman was in London. I will say, Batman definitely, the first one definitely. And I mean, some of the scenes look cool, but like with Anton first, I really lean towards Batman as far as how it looks.
Sure, yeah,
I mean,
same here.
Yeah. And I kind of wish they could have somehow used some of those. I know he didn't want to repeat himself, but somehow maybe a balance of the two. Because sometimes, I mean, a criticism is it does look like a set. You don't see the sky. I mean, that is not a criticism.
Yeah, I do feel at some point that we should travel to some alternate universe where they did shoot, the second movie on the same sets, because it was already built, it was all there. It just seems like a shame to take it down, especially because it is still considered to be the best Gotham City. So just the fact that it could only be used in one movie is such a shame.
Kind of wish you would have kept it for like some type of attraction, but
yeah, that too.
Speaking of which, they just released the last issue of Batman 89. Are you planning on doing a podcast of just general thoughts on that?
So basically, one of the things that I think would be best for that coverage is the specific parts of the Batman 89 comic that I think our audience can connect to, which are the unmade versions of Robin and Two-Face that it kind of tries to bring to life, and we can go from there. And then because of the fact that Sam Hamm and Joe Quinones do share out my video essays on that, I am aiming to see if I can get them on. Definitely Sam Hamm. I mean, ideally, putting this out there, ideally Sam Hamm comes on for two, one about writing for the scripts back in 89 and through 90, as well as another one where he and Joe Quinones come on and we can talk about the comic series. But I think that the main appeal to our audience specifically would be sort of covering how does this sort of match up to the original ideas, and if we're taking the origin of Two-Face in the comic, to me that's the best part of the whole comic, is really Billy D. Williams's Two-Face origin and evolution. And I've seen some criticisms of just like, it's mainly about Harvey. There's not much Batman in this. And just like, I'm sorry to say, but that's kind of how it was.
Yeah, that's how it is.
Ones.
I mean, look at Batman the Animated Series. I mean, that was a big part of it. He was Harvey for a few episodes before that point. I mean, that's kind of, if it's just, well, that's one of the criticisms of Batman Forever is there is no Harvey. It's just, that's the opposite end of that. And honestly, just in general, I know you want to save that basically for that episode, but I feel like the last issue is the best. I had issues with some of the issues that went through, but I feel like it sums up nicely at the end, because I just read it. I feel like that's the best one. I wish it would have put more time with Harvey than opposed to Catwoman was, I don't want to say the worst part, but I feel like issue 6 was all right, but I feel like it could have been written in a different way because she's kind of just thrown in there.
Yeah, I wonder if Catwoman was an editorial mandate. You know what I mean? We're just like, everyone wants to see Pfeiffer's Catwoman come back. You got to put it in, and that is not. Sam Hamm is writing it, but he wrote the 89 movie. He did not write the Batman Returns that we know. So like that is technically not his Catwoman anyway. On that, so there might be another alternate universe where this is just Two-Face versus Batman the whole time. I do think that it is. It's one where I would have loved it more expanded into like a 10-issue series or a 12-issue series, because like there's definitely a sense where like it could have used more room to breathe. Now I'll just put that out there. I think it could have used some more room to breathe and develop certain aspects, and especially if you have to have Robin in there and you have to have Catwoman in there. I think Robin fits in with the story a lot more than Catwoman in this one.
I agree. Yes.
That if you have to have them in there, then flesh them out even further, and then give Batman a little bit more to do. Considering that this is Sam Hamm's writing, in his scripts there was a lot more screen time to Batman than what we got in the final films of the first two Burton films. So I think some of it was just some mandates of just like people want to see Billy D. Williams as Two-Face, they want to see Michelle Pfeiffer as Catwoman, they want to see Marlon Wayans as Robin. I'm like, okay, but you realize that we only have 6 issues. Like there's a lot that has to be done for that, and I think that it's better served with a longer thing, and I think they, given what the circumstances were, I think they did the best that they could with trying to do that.
If it's for me, I mean, I enjoyed the last issue, but if it's up to me, I would have had it in between the 2 movies, like Batman 1.5, and just have Harvey and Batman, because you don't see him in Batman Returns. That's always
true.
So, I mean, that's something that I feel like, and plus it's in between, so Sam Hamm wouldn't have to worry about the return stuff, which he basically didn't write. I'd be curious if you do interview him. I want like his honest opinion on Returns as a screenwriter. I don't know how upset. I mean, he still got paid, but like his thoughts of how different. Because as a screenwriter, if you wrote something, then the movie was totally different, how you would feel. I mean, I know it's a job,
right? Yeah. I think it just depends on how attached he was to that specific draft. I mean, we'll see. I'll ask him on his thoughts on the other takes. I know. I mean, Daniel Waters has not minced any words in terms of the fact that he is not a fan of the previous movie. He's the screenwriter of Batman Returns is not a fan of '89. He said that before.
Oh, I believe it. I believe it.
So I think Sam Hamm has free reign to go off as much as he can on what he really thinks about other takes. But I'd be curious to find out. But I feel like he's not as attached to his Batman 2 as he was to his '86 draft for the first one.
Oh, of course. And also, I mean, I know you want to interview Daniel Waters, but what about, I believe it's Wesley Strick, the guy who
Wesley Strick. Yeah,
he had a big influence on the final draft.
Yeah, and I think that, look, we would be interested in anybody who's involved with these movies in this big of a way, most specifically in screenwriting. Probably even more so than some of the actors. I might dare to say, simply because so much of our brand is about these unmade scripts, that to bring on a screenwriter and sort of pick their brain on where things went. We were very fortunate to do that with The Bachelors for Batman Forever, and I'd love to keep doing that with pretty much all of them. But I think specifically everyone involved with the first, the 90s era of the Batman films, because that's the nostalgia that people are in our audience really love. And so to bring on Sam Hamm, bring on Daniel Waters, to bring on Wesley Strick, to bring on Akiva Goldsman, all, if I were to tick off all the boxes, that's kind of the podcast bucket list checked off right there.
And plus it would probably be, I mean, some of the lower actors would, when I mean lower, but like more of the second, like, I mean, obviously trying to get like Michael Keaton, Jack Nicholson, that's going to be just not plausible.
Not for where we're at right now.
Yeah, that's what I mean. And I don't mean that offense, but they're like super actors.
Oh yeah. No, and I wouldn't expect that from that. But for ones where, like, Sam Hamm has done this, it's in terms of our guests, it depends on accessibility a lot of the time. So the reason why we were able to bring on The Bachelors pretty easily, especially like right around the time that we were covering Batman, before we first covered Batman Forever, was because she used to teach at the school I went to, so I actually already knew her before this. And was like, let me just bring you on and you tell me stuff that you've told me before. That was an easy way, but you don't necessarily have that connection everywhere. And it kind of just depends on how open they are to talking about it at that time or what they're busy with. I've invited Sam Hamm before on it, but I think that was right before the comic series was even announced. So I'm like, okay, like you're probably under a lot of stuff right now, a lot of stress writing that type of stuff. And probably there's a bunch of NDA stuff. You probably shouldn't be talking about certain things right now.
That's going to be better because now you can ask him about that.
Yeah.
So you wouldn't have been able to ask him about that from before.
Now we can go into the actual comic series as opposed to before, where we didn't even know that existed. Though I guess we could have also brought him back on, in the second episode.
But what's interesting, what you're talking about, I didn't mention it, but you guys are out in LA. Are you native to LA, if I may ask?
Technically speaking, I'm a native to Southern California. I grew up in Orange County, so that's it.
Okay,
it's slightly different, but it's it's close enough. Like my move from OC to LA is very small compared to most people's moves to LA.
And you were, because you mentioned, I believe, you're screenwriting undergrad or graduate.
Yeah, over at USC. So that's how I met Janet Batchelor, and I mean, that's kind of some of the things that I've brought into the podcast. Sometimes are my own ideas with the characters, because obviously I love this character and I love writing. So it's a mix of both.
Awesome. I believe, I forget who it was. There's someone who's on the movie The Batman that went to the same school, if I'm correct.
Matt Reeves.
Yes.
Matt Reeves went. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Cool. I've been to LA a few times. It's funny, you guys mentioned, I think, in one of the later episodes about the traffic there. That is a real thing. But I enjoyed my time in LA. Do you remember, it was a few years ago, they had a Batman exhibit. It's the Makeup Museum in LA. Like, it's
a Makeup Museum.
Yeah, it's been like 2019, but it's like a Batman 66 exhibition inside of there.
Yeah. We did a video on that at that time. This is before we were superhero stuff. You should know. Okay. This is back when I wasn't a co-host yet. But yeah, we came in. Andrew filmed, I think, with a GoPro or something like that, of us just walking through and stuff. And yeah, no, that was really cool to see the original Batman stuff. So
I'm gonna have to go back and look at that. I didn't realize it was an episode. It's been quite some time.
It's a short video. It's not really a formal episode. It's a short video on YouTube from a while back. It's us from, like, I want to say like 2018 or so. So we're looking a little younger. Maybe not too much different from how we do. Yeah, Andrew's hair is definitely shorter at that time, I think.
Cool. Well, I almost went to the same school that Michael Keaton did. I applied to Kent State. I ended up going to the school that George Clooney did go to, NKU. Because he's from this. Well, he grew up in the Cincinnati area.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, his father was a news anchor in Cincinnati. I've seen him from a distance. He's filmed in Cincinnati. George Clooney.
Nice.
But one last thing before we go.
Sure.
I was going to ask. I remember the days of GeoCities with Batman Forever. I was thinking about that and how much, just looking back now, it's a lot of disinformation. And you saw Batman Forever and Batman and Robin in the theater, and I did too. And you guys give it a fair shake. But there was something about Batman and Robin. Like, when I was a kid going out, I wasn't happy. Like, I can look back now and see the positives, but it's just, and it wasn't because it was more lighthearted, because like The Brave and the Bold I liked. It's, I feel like when they moved it from 3 years to 2 years production, I don't know. These guys have done episodes on it, so that's fun to give more info on that. It's just, that was kind of like the death of superhero movies for a while.
For a time, yeah. But I mean, it's kind of a necessary death in some ways, because without that, we wouldn't have gotten, the reboot, which then influenced so many other type of things. Maybe that's not a good thing. Maybe that's, maybe that's a bad thing. But it did lead into that, and it sort of showed the caution of what happens when you just rush this type of stuff and think like, it doesn't really matter because we're just going to sell toys off of this anyway.
Yeah, and they've never done that light again. And I wouldn't necessarily mind it if they did, just not in that way. But they've never even went close to.
I don't think we're going to see that in live action. In animation, sure, obviously with Brave and the Bold and with the Batman 66 animated movies in Adam West's final years. But in live action, I really doubt it. It would have to be. Well, I mean, I think there's room for it, because when I saw Matt Reeves as the Batman, I'm just like, this is probably the most you could get. This is the closest. Yes. Yeah. And so if they're going to do another reboot, they have to scale it back. Because I'm just like, I don't really see this going even further than this without just really being like, okay, guys, come on. This is getting tiring, because this is another take in the same vein.
It would have to be art. There's no way you couldn't. If it was a dark, it would have to be art. There was just no way. And just, I just don't feel like trying to see a live action Batman R movie, not for the money they're putting into it.
No, I don't see it unless it's a Joker type of thing where it's just like, we got this offshoot type thing going on at the same time as the regular franchise, but they want they want to at least have a regular franchise going, which is what Reeves has provided.
Cool. Well, thanks again, Ben, for stopping by. I'll have links in the description. Best of luck. Best of luck with the podcast.
Thank you.
Cool.
Same to you. Take care.
Peace.